Mormons have very few friends in the religious space. You think that they were already used to debating and defending their ideas, where a lot of other Christian sects don't have that experience.
This idea that we don't have to go through the realm of injustice because on the other side is rainbows and unicorns forever is actually wrong. God has sadness and God has indescribable joy, right? And it's only by going through this realm of injustices that we can become like God.
I don't know that he realizes this or not, but animal sacrifice was actually one of the ways that people pointed to the Savior in ancient Israel. Welcome back to Salty Saints. My name is Hayden Holm. Today in studio we've got with us David Hutchison from Sword of Laban, and we've got my brother Tanner. And we wanted to talk about this Jubilee video that has been blowing up the LDS online space, where Jacob Hansen and Hayden Carroll absolutely showed up for our church. They represented and they threw down with Alex O'Connor.
And now let us reason together.
So let's kind of get everybody's thoughts. I'd love to get your initial reaction after you saw the video. David, we'll start with you. What were your thoughts after seeing it?
Yeah, good summary. I think that Hayden Carroll and Jacob Hansen did a fantastic job. I have seen people, including Jacob, that said that the Christians were destroyed by the atheist Alex O'Connor. I think destroyed is hyperbole.
Yeah,
I think
it's a little harsh.
Very strong arguments there. Yeah. I think there are other strong arguments there, and we can go into that. But it was interesting. It's a little difficult though, because they're not debating just truth versus error. You know, there's also mixed into there the quality of the debater, like how well they prepared and how intelligent they are, and how they can articulate their thoughts. So there's a bit of that mixed in there, and it was interesting to watch, though. What about you, Tanner? What do you think?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting to see like what Hayden and Jacob were able to do was really meet Alex O'Connor on his level. I feel like everybody else was fighting from their own home arena, right? Like there's a lot of like presuppositions, to go Jordan Peterson on you, that they just kind of assumed, right? Like as Alex O'Connor was walking into their arguments and their domain. But Jacob and Hayden really kind of stepped down and said, okay, where do we meet here? Let's start at the beginning and kind of work that way, which is a breath of fresh air. It was really nice to see them do that.
That is a good call out, because it seemed like a lot of the Christians kind of assumed that all the terms that everybody was using meant the same thing to everybody else. For example, like we did a video the other week about our testimony of the Book of Mormon, and for us in the church, that testimony means like our kind of expression of how we feel about a divine incident in our lives. If we felt something that has been confirmed to us, then we kind of call that a testimony. How we know something is true for ourselves. And so we had this video published, and I tell you, a ton of Christians started dogpiling on the video saying like, this isn't actual evidence, you know, you're just using an emotional appeal and you're trying to manipulate people. And it's like, whoa. I think we have different terms here that we're using. And I really like that call out, because I think people absolutely were using their own terms, fighting in their home arena, assuming that everyone else was on the same page with them, but everyone was coming from a different spot. How much do you think a mission had prepared Luke Hansen and Hayden Carroll for this moment? We'll start with you, Tanner.
I mean, like, it goes back to that, like, getting on the same page thing, right? Like, they spent 2 years doing that, right? Brief introductions. You only have 30 seconds at the door. Like, you really have to establish yourself quickly, which they did. I thought they did a great job. I think that they're a little more battle-tried than, you know, all the other Christians there, right? Because how many times have those Christians got up and defended what they believe against friend and foe, right? Because, I mean, Mormons have very few friends in the religious space, you know? It's kind of just the name of the game. So I think that they were already used to debating and defending their ideas, where a lot of other Christian sects don't really have that experience, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think
they do have... go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, I'm talking over you.
That's okay. Yeah, I do think that, because you saw so many different approaches there, right? You saw some like very academic approaches where they would bring up some example from some 19th century philosopher with some particular name. Then they had to explain this to each other. And then you had another approach, and I really like this. And talking about missions, there was a girl. She had dark hair. she bore her testimony. She said, I saw Jesus. He lifted me up. He spun me around. I felt his love. And I was like, that's awesome. And in fact, that was the one time when Alex sat back and he listened, and he was listening to her. I think Alex actually adapted to each. He's great like that, right? He can adapt to whoever he's talking to.
Yeah.
And for her, he just sat back and listened, and he conceded that this was a really good reason to believe in religion. But he said, yeah, you've had this experience, but I haven't had this experience, so it does nothing good for me.
Right. Doesn't apply to me. That was something for you. And he did it in a very respectful way. I think that's a great call out, is the amount of empathy that he brought to the table, the amount of compassion he brought to the table when engaging in a talk about somebody else's belief system that they hold true and dear to their hearts. He didn't kind of trash it. He didn't want to dunk on them. He was very respectful about all that. Great call out. I think the other point that I want to bring up is a lot of other denominations practice regularly apologetics, which is really interesting because so they'll go after other religions, which they learn why another religion isn't true, not necessarily everything about that religion. So what was fascinating is that Hayden and Jacob, coming from our church, the doctrine is about understanding. It's not necessarily going out there saying, like, this is why these people are wrong, this is why this people are wrong. It's more about, like, let's help you understand the doctrine so that you can then teach your children, teach your family, teach your community, and teach other people about it. Whereas the other people may know why everyone else is wrong in that room, but they may not know how to teach what they believe to other people. The other piece that I wanted to bring up here, it seems like everybody in our space is talking about this right now. Why do you think that this has created such a buzz? And why do you think it's impacted the online realm for the LDS Church the way that it has?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, for me, I think that, for one, they're tackling hard problems, right? The problem of evil. And this is a problem that has been thought about and opined about for 2 millennia or more, the entirety of human history.
Yeah.
I do think that while Jacob and Hayden Carroll were extremely good at kind of bringing the Latter-day Saint perspective to the table, I don't think that Alex O'Connor got it. I don't think he got all of the reasons why our theology resolves the problem of evil.
Totally agree.
I thought that would be interesting to get into here a little bit. I'm no Jacob Hansen. I can't, debate at the same philosophical level as him, but I had a few things that I think Alex actually missed when Jacob was saying something and Alex didn't get it. I think we should go into.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's go for it. So what are some of the things that you thought that Alex missed or that you noticed might make for some good clarification here?
Yeah, several things. First is they gave Jacob and actually Hayden gave a really good example of, like, he said, "Are you a father?" to Alex, and Alex said, "No." Well, I'm a father, and the way that I think about wanting my child to become the best that they can be, in fact, to become better than me, is to send them out into the world, not just to have them at home all the time for their entire lives, not to follow them around and to prevent every scraped knee and every failed math test and these things.
Yeah.
But Alex's argument was, well, okay, but if you're God, you don't need to send them out into the unjust world, because the only reason you do this in mortality is because as an adult, that child will have to deal with the injustice of the world, right? And there was no answer back to that. And it's fine because you're on the spot. But as I thought about that, last night and today, I think that premise is wrong. I think that Alex's premise there is that when we become gods, which I don't even think he got that concept as part of our religion, but when we become gods, that all suffering will cease. That is all unicorns and rainbows forever.
Yeah.
And that is not my understanding. In fact, I was looking up today in Moses chapter 7 from the Pearl of Great Price, and Enoch, it says God the Father beheld Satan who veiled the face of the whole earth with darkness, and then God the Father beheld the righteous. And then it says, it came to pass that the God of heaven looked upon the residue of the people, that's presumably the people who weren't righteous, and he wept. Right? God weeps. And Enoch said unto the Lord, how is it that thou canst weep, seeing thou art holy and from all eternity to all eternity? So this idea that we don't have to go through the realm of injustice because on the other side is rainbows and unicorns forever is actually wrong. God has sadness and God has indescribable joy, right? And it's only by going
Right.
through this realm of injustice, as Jacob calls it, that we can become like God. It's not that it all goes away when we die and are resurrected. It's that this is what we need, the experience we need to
Right,
become
because they
that.
did mention a lot
In a sense-
about like the compensation. Like you're going to be compensated for whatever suffering and misery that you experience in this life. And while
Right.
there will be a degree of that, you know, every wrong will be made right, there will be justice. It doesn't mean that the entire reason why we get through trials and why we go through hard things is because there's going to be blessings waiting for us at the end of a rainbow. Necessarily.
Oh yeah.
As much as it means there's something that we can learn from it. Like the idea, and I think Joseph Smith learned this in Carthage jail while he was suffering, was he learned that suffering didn't necessarily indicate an absence of God's love as much as it indicated that God was able to transform that suffering into something great for him. So it was more of an indication that of his strength that he was able to give Joseph to overcome that suffering, if that makes sense. That was kind of just like randomly put together on the fly, but
100%.
yeah, go ahead.
I think that it's kind of silly because I think a lot of Christians also believe this, that, you know, you're sent here on earth and you experience the full spectrum of emotion only to prepare you to be only happy forever after. You know, like that doesn't make sense in my brain. You know, like you're here to learn how every emotion applies to you as a soul, because you're going to need your, you know, emotional preparedness for the eternities, right? It just doesn't it doesn't make sense to experience that full spectrum and then just hop into heaven and glorify God forever as an angel in the choir and just be happy for eternity, right? Like that doesn't seem like progression, you know? Like I'm a terrible singer. That's not the heaven I want, right? So I feel like David, you nailed it on the head where it's like, yeah, you can still suffer and be God, right? Like that's something that he's agreed to in this plan that he's put for us and in this experience that we're having here.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, mainstream Christians will, I wouldn't say make fun of us, but they'll argue against our idea of a limited God, is what they would call it, perhaps.
Right,
and you know, Trent Horn released a video today about like how the LDS God being so limited is actually a problem. It doesn't solve any problems for the problem of evil, and it actually creates problems. I don't think they get it, because God is limited insofar that he has a goal. And so if instead of, you know, Alex O'Connor's idea of the limited God is, or perhaps Trent Horn's idea, is that God cannot take away the suffering from the world. He can't prevent that deer with its leg stuck in the branch from like dying of starvation all alone. Like he can't do that. And that's what I think the caricature of the limited God is. But what limited God, I think we need a better word for it, is God chooses to do certain things in order to fulfill his purposes, right? What it is his purpose. It's to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man. And if that means that you have to go to earth and go through awful things, then that's what that means. And it's not that God can't take away those things, it's that he actually doesn't take away he chooses not to. He's limited insofar that he chooses a certain path for us and for himself. And is that limiting him? Like this idea of like sending my child out into the world, if I was to follow my child around 24/7, make them have no failed math tests and no scraped knees, and, you know, at every point
you kissed like, every boo-boo,
exactly. Or if I were to keep them in my house for 24/7 and never let them go out, am I limiting? So let me say the opposite. If I was to not do those things, am I limiting myself as a parent in my choices? Like if I send them out into the world to get bullied at school or whatever, if I do those things, am I limiting myself? No, I'm choosing because I have a higher purpose, and it is the means to the higher purpose, right? And I think that was lost on Alex, to be honest. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh no, that makes perfect sense.
It reminds me of like the garden. So in the Garden of Eden, the big lie was that a knowledge of good and evil will make you like God. Where that's the lie, because it's discerning good from evil is what makes you God, like God. And so being able to discern good from evil means that you have to be in a plane where evil can exist. And in that plane, God can't dwell there, because no unclean thing can enter into God's presence and dwell with God. So we have to exist in a place away from God. I like that example of sending your kid to school and being bullied. I think Jordan Peterson has an example in 12 Rules for Life where he had a mouth on him when he was younger, and he was getting picked on, and there was like a bunch of kids about to beat him up. And right at this moment, right outside the school, his mom walked by, and she looked him dead in the eye, and then she just looked away and kept walking forward. The average parent that sees that today would say, like, what a cruel and calloused mom. But Jordan Peterson wrote that he actually really enjoyed that she did that later on and was grateful for it because it forced him to have to confront his own problems, and it forced him to have to become someone different and become stronger to face his challenges.
Absolutely, yeah. And I was just screaming at the screen when Jacob was speaking. 2 Nephi 2, of course, maybe he doesn't have it memorized, and it's fine. He's on the spot.
Well, and there's so much going on, I'm sure. Like, you're in this
so much
room,
going on, right?
The tension's palpable. You got a timer over there. Yeah, you're on a camera.
It's so hard. It's so hard, for sure. But 2 Nephi 2 teaches exactly this, right? It teaches us that were God to prevent evil from happening, he also prevents the good from happening. Mm-hmm. Do you want that kind of God? The God that does not let you have any good? Do you want because that's what you get if you take away the evil. And the good more than offsets the disvalue of evil, right? The good being the soul building, the cosmic journey of man, and the joy and eternal lives that lies in our future. To say that there could exist a state where we could have zero adversity and still end up like God is preposterous. I would, if I had zero adversity, I would end up after a million years as a lump on the couch watching reruns of The Good Place or something. I wouldn't end up like God. The only way I'm going to end up like God is if I have hard stuff. So bring it. Bring it. I think that should be our attitude, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And we're seeing that today. I mean, there's this rise of, a British guy came to America, and there's this funny joke that he made. He said, Americans are so great at obeying their children, And so the idea being these parents work, they bend over backwards to just not make their child upset or cry or anything like that. And I totally agree. And so we're actually able to see where this ideology goes with a lot of the parents and families today. These kids are growing up, and we've got so many problems, like texture issues. You've got so many mental disorders. You've got so many different types of spectrums and everything that's going on today. And it's just this is insane. This is crazy. We don't have a stronger generation of kids. I would argue we have a weaker and weaker generation of kids. The Coddling of the American Mind does a great job of kind of pointing that out, where there was this mom, this 8-year-old for his birthday wanted to I think just walk home from the subway by himself. And she was like, okay. She made sure he knew how to get there. She made sure that he had everything that he needed to do that. And she did that. And then I think somebody called the cops on her or something like that. And everyone was just freaking out. How could you do that? Where 20, 30 years earlier, that was happening all the time. We now view that as just this terrible, scary, awful thing, which is weakening people. It's leading to kids becoming weaker and weaker and more dependent on their parents instead of helping them realize that they're stronger than their challenges. So I love that call out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think actually that it's a complex problem of the problem of evil is actually not one problem. And I think that was part of the problem during the debate, is that the problem of evil consists of maybe 3 different problems inside of it, right? And they were kind of jumping back and forth between them. There's the problem of why do just things happen in nature that are bad? Like a child is born with spina bifida or some severe condition, and it's nobody's fault. It's just part of nature, right? And then there's other problems that, a child is hit by a bus. It's nobody's fault, but it is an outgrowth of us interacting as humans on this planet, right? And then there's a third class of problems that's Hitler, right? The actual evil, and somebody that does something, and it's due to another human, right? And that's also an outgrowth of us living on this planet. But there's actually different kinds of evil or bad in the world, and they can be addressed differently, I think. But I was noticing in the debate they were kind of jumping around between them, and it's a little bit challenging to answer all 3 problems in one, I think.
Right. Different degrees of suffering. There's suffering brought on by just yourself. There's suffering that's brought on by other people. There's suffering that's brought on by evil acting against you. Absolutely. That's a great point. Tanner, you were about to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, the real beauty of that is that it, and this is what Jacob finally got to at the end, is that our theology believes that we had informed consent before we came down here, right? That God showed us the plan and that we accepted it. So we knew that there would be suffering. We knew that there would be different levels of difficulty throughout our lives, and that it would be, some things would just be, chaos. Some things would be random. Some things would be painful and we wouldn't completely understand them. Knowing that we knew all that and we still came anyways really kind of eliminates this whole problem of like, why is there suffering? It's like, we knew there was suffering. This is the plan that God put out for us. We chose it. We had every intention of following him while we're here, and hopefully we've returned to live with him, right? We accepted the plan and we're carrying it out now. So it's kind of a non-issue for people of our church. It's like, oh, who's struggling with this? Like this is a problem for people, because it's from primary, this is something that we all understand, is that before we came here, we had this talk and we all voted to be here, and that's what we're working through now. So it's really cool to see that we have answers that a lot of people are still wrestling with those questions,
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex heard this point, and you could see the light bulb go off in his mind. But then he came back and he said, well, did the animals put up their paws and say, sure, we'll go down as well? And actually, we don't know. But it's interesting. It's a little ironic that for Alex to think that an animal suffering is, bad or undesirable, well, that's sort of a sign of a higher moral he's picked up from somewhere. And that's not explainable by atheism. So there's this whole like catch-22 loop going on there that I'm not sure what his answer would be for that.
Well, one of the really interesting
things... There was a lot of
things...
talk about animal suffering, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. One of the interesting things that I noticed is that, like, and I don't know that he realizes this or not, but animal sacrifice was actually one of the ways that people pointed to the Savior in ancient Israel. And so they would bring like an unblemished lamb and they would sacrifice it, and so there was a bit of suffering that would happen with these animals. And it was all pointed to show people like, this is what the Messiah is going to be like. They're going to be this sinless creature who will have the sins placed on them, like they would do in the ancient Israelite temple tradition, is they would actually put their hands on the head of the lamb. They would put the sins of the people on that lamb, and then they would sacrifice it, or they would send it off into the wilderness. And so it fascinates me to see that, like, that was a symbol. We believe in a God who is aware of, like, even the smallest sparrow whenever they fall. And so it's like, we can see how God deals with sinless creatures by the way he dealt with Jesus Christ. And so when Jesus Christ was suffering, God was with him. And so I don't think we know but I would wager that God is probably also with these sinless creatures when they suffer. I don't think God necessarily will remove that suffering every single time, but I do think he will be with them in their time of need.
And also, this might be splitting hairs a little too much, but I think there's just a difference between just pain and suffering, right? They talked about how consciousness is required for suffering. And animals, like 99.99% of animals, have no concept of time, if not 100%, right? They don't know that they're going to die one day, So like when they're feeling pain, they're saying ow, but they don't know why they're feeling pain most of the time, and they don't know the duration of that pain or anything like that. So there's limited processing of that pain, right? So I don't know if every moment of pain that an animal feels actually qualifies as suffering, right? If they're interpreting that. I think they just might be hurting, which is not fun to see, which is painful to watch, right? But what is, does it qualify as suffering? I don't know. It's an interesting question that he brought up. But at the end of the day, knowing God and knowing his plan, can God talk to animals and extract some sort of informed consent from them, in the pre-existence? Probably. Why not? He had this plan that he proposed to everybody. So them magnifying their, fulfilling their purpose on earth requires suffering. So I can only imagine that they'll be returned tenfold for that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that, that's, for me, that's a difficult, like you said, it may be splitting hairs, but it's difficult to say. We don't know. Of course, we're taught in our scriptures things that pertain most directly to us. as human beings. But at the same time, I did see this moment in the debate, like when Alex's first claim was that suffering makes God's existence unlikely. Hayden Carroll came up there, and his argument was, well, is consciousness required for suffering? And Alex said yes. And then Alex conceded that theism better explains consciousness, right? But Alex is a good debater. He very quickly pivoted to, because he was losing a bit of ground there, he very quickly pivoted to, instead of like suffering makes God's existence unlikely, to suffering is unexpected if a good God exists. I think that was his wording. But here's the thing: with our religion, suffering is entirely expected if a good God exists. It's the exact opposite of what Alex was arguing. He was arguing that suffering is unexpected if there's a good God in the heavens. I would say suffering is entirely expected if there's a good God in the heavens, because of what he's trying to make us into. And so suffering, animal suffering, I would also posit, is entirely expected. For similar reasons. Of course, they're not necessarily on the same path as us, but for similar arguments and similar reasons, I would also posit that all suffering is probably entirely expected rather than unexpected. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, everything was created spiritually before it came to this earth, but the reason why we come to the earth is in part to get a body, because at one point we're going to be resurrected and we will dwell with each other. And I think there's verses in Isaiah that talk about how animals won't be killing each other. And there's going to be a knowledge of the world, or of the Lord, all around. And that being in God's presence, similar to the Garden of Eden, will make it a paradisiacal place where we don't have these other influences of a telestial plane in our lives that makes us go out there and do evil things, or that may cause a lot of unnecessary suffering, which you wouldn't have if you had like a resurrected body. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that answers the question. I don't know. That was just kind of one of the thoughts that came to me. But what are one of the takeaways as we look at this? What's the takeaway for the average member who sees this? They're excited about it. They like all the buzz that they're seeing about it. What can they take home and implement in their family from this?
Oh, good question. I think that if the average member watches this debate, they should take note of the questions or the statements that Alex O'Connor put forth, and mentally check yourself. If you don't know the answers to those right off the bat, that's a great place to start. Just like study up, right? Like Jacob and Hayden Carroll, they did us proud, which is awesome. But we should all, as members, be able to do that. That's the ideal, right? And I think the church focuses on that, and we do pretty well for ourselves as a body. But if you're an individual member watching this and you couldn't answer those questions, let's hit the books a little bit more,
Right.
Yeah, and speaking of picking the books, I would say a takeaway is just go ahead and read 2 Nephi 2 again at a minimum. there's other places in the scriptures and Moses that can shed light on these as well. But it's just such a great exegesis. Is that the right word for this? It lays it all out. If there's no law, there's no sin. If there's no sin, there's no righteousness. There's no righteousness, there's no happiness. Goes through linearly through. And as you're reading it, one thing that an exercise that I did is I tried to imagine a world where there wasn't good and bad, or where there was only good. Let's say that we're all just rainbows and unicorns, and yet I can become like God. Like, can you imagine that? If somebody can, let me know, because I cannot picture it. From what I know about God, which is of course limited based upon the scriptures, and from what I've gleaned, that wouldn't turn me into him, right? So that's a real challenge to this whole argument. Yeah,
I don't know that this is a question that earlier generations had, because there was so much suffering involved in the daily lives of everybody up until our generation. It's like, like pioneers, absolutely. Before that, there was like diseases that would sometimes just wipe out an entire city, and you would just have to keep going. You'd have to chop the firewood. You'd have to take care of the animals and do all the stuff. And so I think suffering to a lot of the people who have lived on the earth is just a way of life. It's like, this is life. Welcome to it. It's hard, and then you die, but you have God with you to help strengthen you. You get take the Savior's yoke upon you and find rest in your suffering. Just like the people of Alma, when they were in bondage, they were able to feel that weight lifted off of their back, even though they were still serving and being slaves. They were able to just go about their work joyfully. And that is the kind of product that I want for myself. That's what I want for my kids too, so that they can approach suffering with the right attitude. Not approach it saying, I shouldn't be experiencing this or anything like that, as much as saying like, yeah, this is a part of life, and I know someone who could help me get through it and become someone better afterwards, and not get bitter and angry and resentful and start up some kind of a Instagram account besmirching the church and all of that. But not to name names or point fingers or anything. Yeah.
Nice.
I've got a funny story to kind of wrap up my point, which is I introduced Minecraft to my kids a couple years ago, and they were playing it, but initially it was just too hard for them because they couldn't get a house built before night falls. And as you know, in Minecraft, as soon as night falls, zombies and skeletons come out and slaughter you. You just die, right? So we switched it over to I think it's called creator mode or something like that. But essentially, you have no risk. You can do anything. You have all resources. This is like God mode, essentially. And at first, they really loved it because they could build whatever. They could, summon anything instantly to fill their houses with animals and things. But it took about 20 minutes. I came back, and all they were doing was filling mountains full of TNT and blowing them up. That's what it resorted to. And it always does in Minecraft. It always comes back to what big explosion can we make? And with a life that's soft, without without pressure, it self-destructs almost every time. Right? You need that hardship in your life to push you forward. Or you just end up blowing up mountains in Minecraft all day, right?
Right. The load gives you traction. That's right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think those are pretty much all of my thoughts. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to add?
I think that's it for me.
Okay, great. Well, until next time, I'm Hayden Holm. This is David Hutchinson, Sword of Laban, and Tanner. We're Salty Saints, and we'll see you next time.